Support comes from Sunday Morning Cafe, presenting Resilience and Creativity, a concert and interview with Royce Martin, creator of Swag Time, and resilience researcher Dr. Tom Wagner on August 2nd, sundaymorningcafe.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. In 2015, it was announced that Ta-Nehisi Coates would give the world his vision of the superhero Black Panther. Coates is a journalist, and at the time, he was already an award-winning author celebrated for his explorations of racism and politics. That was, in part, what created such buzz about his leap into the world of comic books and the futuristic nation of Wakanda.
The protagonist can't just exist outside of context. It has to be a textured, built out, world. T'Challa has to manage a country. Captain America don't have to do that. Spider-Man don't have to do that. He has to be a head of state. And it's tough. That's the sort of character depth that we're aiming for.
And that was author Ta-Nehisi Coates speaking in a promotional video by Marvel Entertainment several months after the release of issue 1 of Coates' Black Panther. Between the excitement generated by the news Coates would write Black Panther and the inaugural issues becoming a New York Times bestseller and Marvel bestseller in spring 2016, Coates' first comic was a cultural touchstone. It also brought up questions about what it contributed to comics as an art form and who should be making them. Howard Rambsy II is Distinguished Research Professor at Southern Illinois University-Edwardsville, and he's the author of a new book titled Writing Black Panther, Ta-Nehisi Coates and Representation Struggles. Rambsy joins us now. Rambsy, welcome back to the show, and congrats on the book.
Oh, thank you so much, and thanks for having me here.
So, tell us about your thoughts generally when it comes to Coates. We did talk about this a little bit last year when you came on to discuss the Black Lit Network.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, one of the things I've always, before he was writing comics, I was just following him as a blogger, as a journalist. He wrote a memoir, and I was very interested in that. And then it was announced, like you said, in 2015 that he would write a comic book. So I was even more excited. I had been following comic books, and now this writer I respected in one realm would be entering another realm that I was interested in. So I was excited all the way for that. And shortly after that, I started co-teaching a course on comic books. And so it just all lined up perfectly.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on comics as a medium? Tell us about your personal relationship to comics.
Yes, it's interesting because I was just been reading, I teach African-American literature, but I was reading about how fewer and fewer people read literature for entertainment. If they're reading, it's just to read for information. And I've always been reading comics as for fun. And so for one, it was good to just start being able to teach a class on comics, to share something that I really best enjoyed on my own time and hoped that I could bring students along with me. And so then to have the opportunity to start writing about it in a scholarly way was still something that kept me energized, and so I enjoyed it. But I just liked the idea of using words and images to communicate ideas.
Mm-hmm. And just to make sure that we are talking about the same thing, graphic novels are one thing.
Yeah.
It is sequential art, but comic books are another. What is important to understand about the distinctions between the two?
Yeah, well, I think for me, just being in the comic book world meant going on Wednesdays, that's New Comic Book Day, new comic books. So the thin issues are coming out, 25, 22 pages are coming out. People started using graphic novels as a way to kind of legitimize comics for everyone, and they would put larger books together, or sometimes people would write them as a whole kind of book narrative. But I liked getting the individual issues and then give them as trade paperbacks. And it also meant just being in comic book stores, shout out to my own Heroic Adventures in Edwardsville, and then just being around people who were into comics and talking about comics on a regular. So that felt like, I think, something that's slightly different. I think they overlap, but I think one is just kind of more weekly, monthly than yearly kind of basis. That's how comics felt to me.
Yeah, and it's building a relationship sort of over time, right?
Yeah, it is.
So the focus of your book is on what you call representation struggles. is this something that came to mind pretty immediately after? I mean, even the news just came out, let alone the publication of Coates' Black Panther?
Yeah, well, the idea of representation struggles came to me as I was thinking about it. And I would say representation struggles because for forever, it seems, I think there's been these kind of struggles about how are people represented. And if we're talking about African Americans, I mean, early on, something I always talk to my students about is Frederick Douglass. There was this little illustration that someone had done of him saying he was like this haggard kind of slave escaping, and he was bothered by that because he wanted to be represented in a certain kind of way. And so that's Frederick Douglass time. So think about all of the things that happened between there where people are thinking about representation struggles. So that was one. But I also started thinking about this idea that where you will have progress, you will sometimes have setbacks. And so the idea that Coates was coming into comics was really kind of a step forward in many ways. But then it was also a struggle because people who hadn't paid attention to comics, they kind of overlooked them until this person came in. So it had me thinking about, oh, wow, that's a struggle for some folks who've been in comics but didn't ever get it taken this seriously. And then Coates get in so serious. So I was just thinking about that push and pull of things. It's never just, hey, this one person has achieved and that's it. It's usually a kind of back and forth. And so that's why I just got really fascinated with the idea of representation struggles.
Mm-hmm. In the introduction, we heard Coates himself talk about what he was thinking when it came to T'Challa. When we look at the way that Coates wrote Black Panther, what is it that stood out about his treatment of that story, about the arcs that he was writing, that did make it different from past representations of this character?
One that he went on in almost immediately and began questioning, like, why would these people be so advanced in Wakanda and then still go to a certain kind of monarchy? So he had characters questioning that immediately. The line they would say is no one man should have all this power. And Coates was playing off of a line that when Malcolm X first came on the scene in the late 50s, people said, hey, no one man should have this power, all this power. And so he began questioning this one person running this place that is very technologically sophisticated. So that was one. The other one that he did that was really kind of a nod to how really good he was on representation was rethinking how women were represented in Wakanda. He really gave women much more complex renderings and depictions. And I think all of that just were a credit to how he was thinking creatively about the ideas.
Mm-hmm. Give us a bit of a primer, a background on what Wakanda is, what makes it special. I mean, there have been the Black Panther films, which was, I think, an introduction for very many people, sort of in mainstream mainstream audiences. But yeah, what is Wakanda? What is important to know?
So Wakanda is a fictive African nation, and it's well known because it hasn't been conquered, and is very considered technologically advanced, which is kind of opposite of how many, unfortunately, popular depictions of Africa. And so in Marvel Comics universe and then beyond, as the movie came out, it just was a way for people to have this very kind of complex view of how Africans were rendered. We should have had those anyway, but the comic book really was forward-thinking in that way. It got us thinking about that. And so Coates went in and really tried to even give us more on Wakanda. People had just usually talked about it. When he started writing, one of the things he did, and I talk about in the book, is he tried to talk about specific places in Wakanda. He really tried to map it out, both figuratively and literally. He literally created a map of Wakanda and said, hey, this is this place. Here go different areas in the place. They're very distinct in these ways. And so Wakanda was that. It just gave people, as you saw when the movie came out, just a lot of pride in how we think about this continent known as Africa using this fictive place.
Mm-hmm. Were there certain narratives that Coates was working against as he was writing this Marvel comic? And, I mean, when you hear Black Panther, there is a particular sort of political and social history around Black Panthers as an organization, right?
Well, I think one that anytime someone is doing something that's kind of progressive, when you think about the history of Black representation, like just the notion of complexity, I think he's working against simplistic depictions of Black people. When you start trying to say, hey, I'm trying to do something complex in my rendering of black people, then you're working against a long history that was just the opposite, something that treated people very baseline, one-dimensional. And so by giving a certain complexity to that, I think he was really elevating what Black Panther could be. One of the chapters I enjoyed most, writing most, was at the end, and I called it Star Wars for Black People. It was the last one. And right there, he was kind of taking us to a Wakanda in the stars, out here in these interstellar spaces. And I think that kind of furthered this idea of what he was working against. Like, you didn't even think about it till I was reading that part of his comic. I said, oh, wow, you don't see that. Usually it's one or two black people when it's a space kind of representation, but he has many of them. Mm-hmm. And so I think writing just against a certain kind of isolation, writing against a certain kind of earth-boundedness, it was very Afrofuturistic. It was very forward-looking, very exciting to read.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking today with Howard Rambsy II. He's the author of Writing Black Panther, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and Representation Struggles. Rambsy is also a distinguished professor of research at Southern Illinois University-Edwardsville. As you were writing this book, sort of thinking about how it was received, universal acceptance or praise, that's more than anybody can ask for. And there were some who loved Coates' Black Panther, and clearly you are among that group. But there were write-ups in the New York Times, National Public Radio, Vanity Fair. But there were others who were not as big fans of what Coates was doing. Mm-hmm. Talk with us about what the differences were in these groups' receptions of Coates' Black Panther that were noteworthy to you as a scholar and as someone who has been a longtime comics fan.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the ones that he got, that you hear this quite a bit when someone who wasn't in comics moves to comics, they'll say they're too wordy. They were kind of talking too much. And so I think that was the biggest one that stood out to me. It was not enough action in it. And it seemed to me over the course of reading it, I could tell that he was hearing that and he was adjusting, because it became much more action-oriented over the course of it. Later, he ended up writing Captain America, and it was the same way. It was a lot more action than when he began. So I think that was something that I think was the most recurring one, that you just had that. Something I didn't hear people say as much, but it stood out to me, just someone, again, I was excited because I followed him. But there was a subtle thing where they were saying, what does it mean that someone who's not in comics can come in immediately and kind of move to the top? And so he got on these major titles where there have been other African-Americans in comics who wrote for years but never got those kinds of assignments. So,
how did he respond to criticisms like that?
I think one of them, I saw him in an interview talking about it, and he just said that, hey, I look back on that and he said, I could have said less. He said, I could have let the art talk more. So he could have let his collaborators, the artists, do more. And I think that was one of the ones that I think that stood out to me. So I was pleased to see that. I also saw him in an interview just say that he's been so used to receiving a certain kind of criticism that he had kind of tough skin, and he took it really well. And yeah, he moved. And you can see it in the work. I mean, you can see it getting better. It reminds, something I talk to my students about a lot. I love to see, it's one thing for people to come naturally, quote unquote, good. I'm always interested in people who kind of develop over a long period of time, or even a short period of time, just seeing them making improvements based on the feedback they receive.
Mm-hmm. And from what I understand, it started, so there's 2016, 10 years ago, April, was when that issue 1 came out, and it ran until 2018?
Well, yeah. So it went from 1 to 25 to 2018. Then it started over again. Comics, it started over at 1, and then it went to 25 again. So in total, you did 50 issues. So they were both 1 to 25, then 1 to 25. And that last one came out in 2021. There was a breakage. 2020, all of comics took a break because of COVID. Mm-hmm. They stopped shipping, and then he came out. And so he finished it up in 2021.
Yeah. There was a conversation actively between director Ryan Coogler and Ta-Nehisi Coates. How do you think those two working together, we're talking about, the medium of comic books and with mainstream film, did that help to elevate comic books sort of as an art form?
Yeah, I think one of the ways it elevated is it showed him, Coates had a really big influence on what Ryan Coogler did with the movie Black Panther. So he came out in 2016 with the comic book. Coogler came out in 2018, and you could see him taking from certain things that Coates was doing in the comic book. He did that in the movie. And so I thought that was really good. I mean, it helps me as a teacher because students are much more interested to go back to the comic when they realize, hey, it actually shaped something that they were dealing with in movies. So I think that was one good way. And it just had me thinking a lot about how one medium affects another medium. So that's why I say I ended it with Star Wars for Black people. But I also thought about what influenced Star Wars. I always think of this movie, Hidden Fortress. And I always think about how Star Wars is Hidden Fortress for white people, in the sense that George Lucas was influenced by this Japanese movie, and he ended up kind of adjusting it for an American audience. So just those kinds of things, just we go on and on, seeing influence on influence, kind of how things affect one cultural production shapes another cultural production and so forth.
Is there a specific example of something where we see the comic inspiring the movie?
The biggest one in my mind are, in the comic he calls them the Midnight Angels. In the movie they get their traditional name, the Dora Milaje, but they have a much larger presence in the movie than I think they would have if Coates hadn't been involved. I mean, just if he hadn't been influencing that. So that was really, I think, the largest one. Just the role of women there is really large in the movie, in both movies, actually. And then the second one, you see it even a lot more. It's kind of much more explicit in the second one, where they take on some of those roles. So that's, but it's all over just little subtle things. They do this kind of dream world, and that's straight from the comic book. They slightly changed the wording and the names of things. But you can see, it's really fascinating to see one cultural production influencing another one. Yeah.
I definitely got that also. With representation, there are things that are considered to be wins. What were the wins that came with Coates' writing Black Panther?
I think one, just for me, the big win is everyone knew him as this person who writes about race. And they knew he was really thoughtful in that way, and journalist. And that's all nonfiction writing. The big win to me is just to see how much more he was able to do as a creative, artistic writer. I don't think I would have known that he just could even move in that kind of way as a writer, as a thinker, just as a conceptualist, because sometimes it was just about the choreographing various things. So I think that, for me, was one of the big wins. And then it was another win, just gaining visibility. I mean, so much coverage, the New York Times, the Hollywood Reporter, NPR. So it just placed a spotlight on Black cultural production in ways with comics that is usually just not done. I mean, that first issue 1, sold something like 250,000 copies. So, I mean, financially, a lot of people on that end won. But I think just to have something moving around in the world like that, especially around African-American characters or African characters, but an African-American writer, I think that's a big win in all kinds of ways.
Yeah. And in the last minute as we close, why is this topic relevant today, 10 years after the landmark publication of issue 1 of Coates' Black Panther?
I think it's relevant because it just lets you know this is a topic that sticks with people and they're very interested. I was very thankful to my publisher, my editor, Amy Martin in Bloomsbury, because they seem to believe a lot in this topic. And they were willing to support me on it. And it let me know, I said, oh, wow, if institutions are still supporting this after, and it's a comic book, and they were excited about that like they would be any other big topic, I felt really good about it. It lets me know that this is something that audiences are interested in, publishers and institutions are interested in, and it's something that just can continue to generate conversations. So I think that's really important.
Howard Rambsy II is author of Writing Black Panther, Ta-Nehisi Coates and Representation Struggles, and a professor of research at Southern Illinois University-Edwardsville. Rambsy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
This episode was produced by Elaine Shaw.
Our audio engineer is Aaron Dorr. This podcast was mixed and edited by Aaron.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Hi, I'm Laura Hamden, and my colleague Jessica Rogan and I are your daily hosts of the Gateway newsletter. We meet with the editors in the STLPR newsroom every weekday to bring you the top local stories of the day in a quick and easy 6-minute read by 6 a.m. In an age of overwhelm, it's a refreshing, thoughtful take on the news day, if we do say so ourselves. Fine-tune your daily news habit with the Gateway newsletter. Subscribe at stlpr.org/gateway.